Welcome to first lecture of History of Animation, AAD427 at Zayed University in Abu Dhabi. I'm Patrick Roti, your instructor, and welcome to the amazing world of the history of animation. We have gone through the syllabus at this point and what we're going to do, and so what I'm going to do at this point is just start into kind of the prehistories of animation and some of the things that we'll be looking at in the coming days. This lecture should be fairly short. I have a number of YouTube selections, including the cake zoetrope from Tim Burton's group, My Neighbor Totoro zoetrope from the Studio Ghibli Museum, and also the Pixar zoetrope, and a short film on two short films, one on Edward Muybridge and Jules-Étienne Marais, and their experiments in early motion pictures, and also how that relates to today with the making of The Matrix and bullet time. So today, we've done the syllabus, and I'm going to give you a little bit of class structure, and then we will talk about framing animation. So I have 2 or 3 books, and every day what we're going to do is that we're going to have going to assign some readings, have some daily viewings, and at the end of the first week we will start journaling. So here we go. I'll look at everybody's journal on the first day, get some questions, and then lecture, and then I will assign the reading and the viewing assignment. And so, by the way, this is something I've been asked at times. So wondering whether that this is going to be a project-based class, and actually, since this is completely across the entire college, I don't think it's fair to ask non-animators to do animation work and all these sorts of things. So this is going to be a strict history class with quizzes and essays, etc. So the books that we're using are these: Animation Art from Pencil to Pixel, The History of Cartoon, Anime, and CGI. A New History of Animation from Maureen Furness, and the third revised edition of the Anime Encyclopedia. So, for those of you who who aren't at Zayed University and just seeing this on YouTube, these are all great references. And for those of you who are at Zayed University, just keep in mind that you don't have to read all 3 books. So we're just going to have selections. So let's get started. How old is animation? And what we can say is we can probably pretty safely say 35,000 years old, starting in Paleolithic caves like the ones in Lascaux, France. And so really, to kind of give you the idea of what we're talking about, imagine this. Have this in your mind. Imagine that you're down there and that you're considering the coming of the animals for the next hunting season and that sort of thing. And these paintings are on the walls of this cave, and you're in torchlight, and the torchlight is flickering, and you've got these paintings that have, multiple pictures of multiple images of feet in motion and all that, and it's flickering over these, and it probably will look like, the animal is running, and that is really kind of the early predecessor of animation. In classical times, we had vases and amphora that had pictures of people running. And there are other, let's see here. There's something I remember in Paul Virilio's book, Art of the Motor. There was actually a moving panorama that was unwound as it went by the side of a stationary railway car to give the idea of that it was moving. So these are all predecessors to contemporary animation. So what we have is that in the 1800s there were many different predecessors to animation. One was the zoetrope, and what is it? I think it translates to the Wheel of Life. And this actually had predecessors to it as far back as to 300 AD in China. And in the West, it became popular in the 1800s. So basically, the idea of it is that there is a cylinder with slots, and as the slot scans by your eye, it reveals just the image that's in front of you. And as you spin it, it creates this idea of the persistence of vision. So basically, one thing that happens we have, as creatures that have these things called eyes, we have something that's really kind of interesting is the fact that it takes time for the cells in our retinas to get rid of the impulse. So there's a little bit of persistence of vision. In other words, in our retina, and as it's going into our eye, there's about a 1/12 of a second that it stays in our head. So if it goes faster than that, things start blurring together. And usually, and this is a very technical thing, that usually the minimum amount of the minimum speed that you want to have to not experience the recording of something, the flickering or digitization, is about twice what we can perceive. In sound, like with MP3s and that sort of thing, it's usually about 44,000 samples per second, because the best of us can hear about 22,000 cycles per second. So since we see at about 12 frames per second, double that 24, which has been typical. It was traditional cinema. Is basically the minimum that you usually have. Now with digital video and such, say like for example virtual reality, because we move our heads around so much, and that we have to have something that is almost seamless, that it's running about 90 frames a second. Some video is running at 60. So this is really kind of interesting. So, a lot of these things are not running quite that fast. So, you had the zoetrope, which was, one of the first toys that, was very, very old. Also, another way of doing it is having like 3D printed sculptures that are looping sequences on a circular table that's going around, and then hitting it with a strobe light. I recommend that you go on YouTube and look for Tim Burton's Cake Trope, the Pixar Zoetrope, and the Studio Ghibli Zoetrope, which are this type of stroboscopic zoetrope. Very interesting stuff. Another type of machine like this is something called the phenakistoscope. And it's basically a zoetrope that's a spinning disc with slots in it that you would look at a mirror and you would get the same effect. So, instead of looking at the image on the other side of the cylinder, what's happening is that the mirror is just basically the way that you're being able to see what's on the disc. So basically, what's interesting about this is that this was invented by a Belgian physicist by the name of Joseph Plateau, 1841. So another interesting thing is that I think the daguerreotype, one of the first forms of photography, was 1839. So a lot of these things like imaging and a lot of these imaging experiments started happening in the about the 1830s, which was really kind of an interesting thing. So another version of this, something called the praxinoscope. Praxinoscope. So it eliminated slits and turned the slits into mirrors. There were a couple of different versions of this, invented by 1877 by Charles-Émile Reynaud. What happens is that actually at school there's one that has a flat disc, and then there's this cone of mirrors above it, and then you spin it. In the picture that you see here we have a candle with a lampshade, and then it puts light down onto the cylinder with the faceted mirrors on it. And when you spin it, you're only seeing the one set of images that are directly in front of you. So, but what starts getting interesting is that when Reynaud actually invents a praxinoscope that is able to project on a screen. And the thing is that what we wind up having here is actually, a convergence between animation and cinema, which is kind of interesting. Let's get back to another one of the common toys that were a predecessor to cinema, the flip book. So think about this. It's I think a lot of us did this with as kids, like with Post-its, things like that. Actually, when I was growing up, a little bit in the 70s, there were just little. I was able to go to a paper store and get these little notepads, and I used to make all sorts of animations with rubber stamps, and that was really fun. So, so the thing is that this was actually one of the first animation devices. Also, there was also something else called the mutoscope, M-U-T-O-S-C-O-P-E, mutoscope. And that was just, it's like Edison's kinetoscope. and it stood on the floor, and you would go to an arcade and you'd give it like 10 cents, and there was a reel. There was a big circle of pictures that you just cranked, and it was like a giant cylinder flip book, and it'd last about 30 seconds. A lot of them were pretty fun, but and I almost made one. But the important thing to all of this is that there were all of these different sorts of devices that were exploring the idea of motion picture, whether it was animated or whether it was through photography. And the other thing that's, to me, I think is sort of really interesting and a little crazy is the idea that John Barnes Linnet, he patented this thing, under the idea of that, it's a motion picture thing. And the thing is that I think that patenting a flip book, well, good for him. Took some nerve. So let's get over to some other things. The cinematograph. This is one of the earliest film projectors. So it projected things onto a large screen, made there by the Lumiere brothers. And so the thing is, this was the very first film projector. And if you look at the back here, that box, actually, the first projectors did not use electric light. They used what they called limelight. If you hear the things like, I'm in the limelight, what they used to use, a form of lime and oxygen and it burned extremely brightly. And so the thing is, it was a very high brightness gas lamp, and so there wasn't a lot of electricity involved. So that's that. The first Lumiere brothers films were 17 meters long, lasted 50 seconds. So one of the films that I'm going to assign to you is the arrival of the train at the station. I forget the exact name of it, but it was very startling for people at first. There's a lot of questions as to whether the arrival of the train at the station was quite as terrifying as records say it was, but nevertheless, it was very revolutionary, actually. So, and then actually one thing I'm going to tie things forward is that recently a Russian AI enthusiast took the Lumiere brothers' arrival of the train and put it through an AI program and took it up to 4K resolution, and it's absolutely stunning. So, and it's in the college list of videos to view. So, when we talk about motion picture, this takes us to Edward Muybridge, and I have assigned a short film called I think Sport in the Darkroom, and it's about Jules-Etienne Marais and also Muybridge. So basically, these are the two of the main names that you hear about when you think about early cinema. Muybridge was a celebrated photographer, did landscape work, and but what he did is that he heard of the governor of California at the time, Leland Stanford, which, of course, also Stanford University is named after. He offered $25,000 in the late 1800s, which you could imagine would be like $250,000 these days, or like $1 million dirhams for someone with the ability to prove that a horse's feet left the ground as it ran. So, in response to this, Muybridge, he developed a system of high-speed cameras, high-speed film, that basically let their shutters go as the horse went by, and as you see right here, you can see that Leland Stanford lost his bet, and Edward Muybridge became a rich man, and he became an academic who worked in doing motion studies, and he actually made machines to project his motion studies. And here we go. As you always know with me and cats, he did a lot of motion studies of animals, and here is a motion study of a running cat. So it's all about cats. So something that's really interesting is that you think that these technologies, these things, don't relate to the current day. So although the movie The Matrix is about 20 years old now, or maybe more, maybe 30, what's really interesting here is the fact that the same principles are in play. So in what they call bullet time, basically you have green screen and you have a series of cameras that are set off by a computer over time. You're able to control the motion, speed, angle, and the thing is with the green screen, then you can composite it with computer graphics. But still, the principle is still completely Muybridge. So Muybridge had a contemporary, Etienne Jules Marey. I switched it around a little bit, sorry. And what he did is he did something called chronophotography. And the thing is that it's really interesting is that his camera actually had a circular cartridge and a barrel, and it almost looked like a machine gun. It was really an interesting piece of machinery. But what he did is that he studied people, animals. He did animals a lot. And he studied their motion by doing multiple exposures, like the one below. And the thing is here what we have is that here we have a motion study of a human being with these markers on him. And guess what? This looks mighty familiar, doesn't it? And any of you who are working in computer graphics or animation, you probably can see where this comes from. And that would be motion capture. So basically, a computerized version of Marey's late 1800s techniques in chronophotography and tracking of the human body is actually the fundamentals of computer graphic animation. Motion capture. So I think this is, as I said, today is very short, and what my point is for today is about 2 or 3 things. First of all, there's a very close relationship between photography, animation, and cinema, because animation is a form of cinema. Secondly, a lot of the fundamental technical aspects of early motion picture and the experiments in motion picture are still in use today in very innovative ways. Just basically expanded on from their invention in the 1800s. And that also animation is about as old as our culture is as human beings. So the matter of communicating in time isn't something that's just 100 years old. It's tens of thousands of years old. So you're kind of talking to a medium that's about as old as we are, as beings. So I think this is it for today. Yep, that's it. So in the next lecture, what we're going to talk about is that we will talk about early animators, and Disney also early animations like Gertie the Dinosaur and Lada Raninger. So, thanks so much, and we will get into early experimental animation and the early emergence of animation as we know it. Thanks so much.